When I originally started this channel, I was planning on doing a Redback boot review update after 3 years of ownership. Unfortunately, I have lost, or the pair of Redbacks I originally owned were stolen. However, you can trust me that after the 2.5 year of ownership, they were still fine before they disappeared. And the reason I wanted to do the 3 year ownership update was because I feel like $30, $40 cost of ownership a year is a reasonable price point versus buying a $30, $40, $50 pair of Walmart boots that might last a year or less, or just boots that you might find that are made in China that don't last over a year, that you could find sort of an equal yearly cost of ownership to something that might be more durable and more comfortable. So on that note, I do have a pair of Redback boots that I could borrow, and I have one that I have owned for about 6 to 9 months that I wanted to make some points on to just further anybody that's interested in this Redback boot inquiry, as well as just a sort of a comparison between these styles, because as you might see, these are laced versions as opposed to the Australian work boots that I originally did a comparison review. These Limer boots here, which I mentioned, will come into focus later. Actually, I did not mention it because you see there's two different styles of upper here. And this one I would probably call a two-piece upper, because, or at least two-piece leather, because you have two main parts of the leather here. You have this part that's the front here, in front of the stitching, and then which also, in this case, comprises the tongue. And then it's held together by this second piece of the leather that's wrapped around here and around the back. And again, most of these shoes have either an external, as in this case, or an internal, well, I forgot what it's called, an ankle or a heel tab, I think, or an ankle piece. Anyways, so again, a two-piece one. You'll see this on many American boots, White's boots, Nick's boots, Danner. I'm sure many other designs out there use it. There's no way you have not seen this and not looked at work boots. This one I would consider more of a European design in this case, just because I've only seen this design used in Limer boots, which are here. Even though Limer boots are made in Vermont or New Hampshire, I've also seen it in Swiss surplus boots. These Limer boots that are made in Germany come from there, and I believe there's some other German hiking boot companies that use this design. And I would also consider this a one-piece leather design specifically because, as you can see, there's no stitching holding a second piece of leather. It's just one piece of leather wrapped around and then stitched here with, in this case, about 5 or 6 different rows of stitching. What that makes this design is a more efficient design in the fact that you use much less stitching, which every part of stitching, even though it might be 5 or 6 layers, you know, those layers can come apart, but they also, like in a pair of jeans, you're going to be causing a lot of stress where the stitching meets the leather. And if the leather is specifically not up to bar, you might get something where the leather tears right outside of it, or eventually, if you plan to own a pair of boots for 10 plus years, you could see something like the stitching failing down the road. So in this case, like in the case with many things, the less you have to make, the less design flaws that you'll have in terms of manufacturers. The workers, especially if they're lower paid workers, they might not have the master craftsmanship or whatever role-playing, LARPing term you want to use for an expert that's going to upcharge a pair of boots so that it lasts forever, because everything's done to a high level of detail like you might see in Swiss boots, but it's also just a more efficient design in general, which means it will also cost cheaper. And so my main point I wanted to make was there with it being a more efficient design. Now, let me take off the Swiss boots I have, or not the Swiss, the other pair of Redback boots that I currently own, and you'll see that it's got that same one-piece design. There's no stitching except probably on the back here, and that's covered up by this ankle tab, ankle piece But again, same boot or same company. They're both Redback boots, and you have those two different designs. You also get a more interesting contrast here because this one, there's three sort of eyelets that I see most often. You have, well, I guess you could consider zippers. Well, never mind. So here you have speed laces, and that's just where you have this external lace that it sort of slips through there like lube, and then you have, a design more like this, but you'll more associate with Limer, and that's why I'll bring it up here in a minute, where they just use studs. So you have speed laces, you have studs, and then you just have your traditional eyelets. And certainly if we're talking about what's efficient, what works most often, the eyelets is probably what you would find most recommended, just because they've been used for a long enough time. They'll, there's plenty of research there. Anyways, whereas I've seen problems with studs that are not properly done where these can bend. Now this one here feels pretty sturdy, but I've seen them where they'll sort of cut them off, and they'll be like very tiny there, and then they'll open up again. And I think you could have a problem there where it's causing a problem with the laces of the boots and the friction there, when you wrap it around, such as this, where it's sort of causing the laces to wear down, which in case you might need more laces. So, there's many problems you could find with something like studs where they break off, or again, you're breaking your eyelets, but in this case, I think you have many problems with speed laces as well. For one, you can see that it's a two-part design where there's the metal there, and then there's sort of the key ring here. The biggest problem I have with the speed laces in this situation is that once you're talking about more than what I would consider like 3 or 4 speed laces, when you snug up the boots, they've got two problems. One, I guess it makes it easier to take them off because they open up very simply like that without there being much holding it in place. But two, when you get to these many eyelets, it's just sort of a disaster to lace up. And I would not want anything with more than, like I said, 3 or 4 speed laces, because you have to go through each speed lace to tighten it. And even when I go 2 laces up, tightening that is just a bloody nightmare. I think many people might criticize a design like Limer boots because you've got this many studs. And let me also mention one other problem I've seen with studs is if you are sitting crisscross applesauce, especially when you have studs higher than this, and most boots have the eyelets and then the studs up top, is that sitting sideways on the studs is not comfortable. So definitely no Native American form of sitting structure there. But regardless, I could see many people criticizing a pair of boots like this because you have to start from scratch each time you lace it up. Now, like this pair, it's very easy to take off because you just have to unravel it completely. But going back and forth, it's what I would consider the easiest way to just snug a pair of boots up. And on that note, I think with this, I apologize for jumping all over the place, but with this one-piece leather sort of design, and again, I've seen this with longer pairs of like whites and nicks, where the tongue goes up all the way. So what I mean by that is the tongue here is connected to the leather, usually like right there. And what you would do is you sort of, when you have that like 8+ inches of boots, you sort of fold it up like this when you do it, and it gives you about 3 or 4 layers of leather. In this situation, there's just not enough boot, but it gives you plenty to slide your foot in, and then you just you tug it in like that. But what that gives you is that there's going to be no crud that goes between there if the tongue ends, somewhere down here as opposed to ending up here. So you get, when it's tightened up, it's a very snug form of boot. Whereas the problem with this one is you could get crap, especially something like water through here. And actually, in one of these boots that I borrowed, I think it's the other one right here. You can see there's already a tear in the leather right here. Dear God, my quality. Anyways, there you go. So you have a tear in the leather there, and that's probably just from the person sliding their foot in. Whereas again, this one gives you plenty of room. I mean, it's billowing. So again, I think there's a problem with the eyelet, or the tongue in this application. Again, I've seen other longer boots remedy that. But my problems with the speed laces is, you know, again, I can't snug it up. You have to start at the bottom, and it's such a loose, looby design that you have to do each one individually. And if you screw up at all, they'll just slide right back down and loosen up. But there's also problems with this design, which also uses mostly eyelets and then some studs. Like with the Limer boots here too, this one does have a bottom speed lace before it goes to the studs. But boy, what in the hell was I going to say? It actually holds pretty well in this case. I'm not sure how or why. Maybe it's just a specific type of speed lace they use. But it holds that bottom, and that's really all that needs to be held, especially if your dog's going to eat at your cables there. But in this situation, it works okay. Like I said, I think ideally I'd want 3 or 4 speed laces if they use them at all. But I think that particularly the cons might outweigh the pros for speed laces. And this one, it's pretty, you know, easy. I don't know why. It's just it's much easier to lace up that way. As you can see that I just did that very easy. And then once you've wrapped around the those first studs there, it holds itself in place pretty well. Again, I think once you get to about 5, it's much harder to hold the laces without there just getting some slack there in the laces. And obviously in a pair of boots, you want it laced pretty tight. So there's my opinion there with the laces. This one is a doozy of a time lacing up. And even if it was standard laces with this 2-piece leather design, you know, just standard eyelets, excuse me, it still takes significantly longer to lace these up from scratch when you have to take them out. If there's more than 4 eyelets, you know, I mean, like, God forbid, the worst is a pair of Doc Martens. Those ankle boots of theirs has like 10, 11, or 12 eyelets, and you have to unravel half of them, and then you have to ravel them back again. And I mean, at the end of the day, I don't want to be on my deathbed wondering how much time I spent lacing up my boots, especially if it didn't give me much support. So in this case, specifically for ankle boots, I find the studs far superior, especially when they're down this far low, despite the disadvantage where you can't lay crisscross on it. I guess in some cases, if this isn't strong enough, you could snag in here, and it could pull that. I haven't had a problem with it. Laces are disposable and something that can be replaced. But I have noticed two problems with this design here specifically. And I'll go back to the Limer boot comparison to show that not all stud designs have this problem, but this one specifically does. And one, it is that when you combine the speed laces with the studs, specifically, like I said, when you get to this 5th eyelet, there is so much slack here, and there is so much tightness that the stud provides over the speed lace, which again is very loose, looby, frictionless. I don't know if that's the correct word, but regardless, there's so much openness here and so much tightness here that it actually compresses like this 1, 2, 3, you know, I mean 4 or 5 layers of leather. There's 2 here. You've got this here, and when you tighten it up, I mean it's pretty connected, these 2 areas here. And then you've got these leathers here between the tongue. You've got all that compressing against the upper part of your foot. I can't remember what that bone area is called, but I'm sure people have experienced that before when they've over tightened their boots. In which case, yes, it is very important to have a tight pair of boots, especially in this lacing region. But I had it, every time I've over tightened this pair of boots, I have had that compression there. It cuts off circulation. Your feet get very cold, and even though in previous videos I've said how important it is to have this toe box area open, you know, to allow for airflow and breathability, because the toes are farthest away from the heart, which means that they'll usually get cold first. The lacing areas are very important, and for whatever reason, this design, and I specifically believe it's because of the speed laces straight to the hooks, that you get that area that it cuts off the circulation. So again, not the perfect design. I would probably follow the Limer. The Limer's been tried and true, red, white, and blue. It's been used for over 50 years as far as I know. Speed laces and then studs all the way up. It might look a little bit weird, but it's a better design. And again, I think the one-piece designs are better. I like studs as well, at least in this ankle boot design. So the other problem I've had applies to the Redback boots. So we've gone over the eyelets, we've gone over the design philosophy, and now does it work with our favorite polyurethane hydrolysis mix? And the answer is no, because I've already had splitting right there in the leather, and I'm thinking it's because you can snug these bad boys up so much that it causes tension here, all the way down here. And even though I haven't seen the midsole here, the polyurethane midsole fail particularly, I haven't seen it like you see with foam where it's breaking off and the piece isn't dissolving the right word, I don't even know. But it's pulling at the leather here. And I mean, all things considered, even though you've seen that other pair of Redback boots where the tongue was split that I showed you, and that you've seen that the leather they're splitting, I mean, it is pretty nice leather that they use in the Redback boots, all things considered, for a $100 pair of boots. You pretty much have to go to like Nick's or White's, maybe a couple types of Thorogood, Weinbrenner, I don't even know, to get a 6, 7, 8 ounce leather that's used in a pair of boots, because most of the other companies, I mean, even the American companies like Danner, I don't think they use leather that's thicker than this in their boots in the past few years. And I've been to the factory store. So I've also, well, again, even though the midsole has not failed here, wait, it's not in this one. I gotta take the other one off my foot. Again, you see another tear in the leather there. Sort of right there. And then on this other side, you actually see that it looks like the leather is separating from the midsole. So again, I think because you can over tighten these laces that it's causing there to be a tear. And it's consistent with both boots where the leather's tearing, but not particularly the midsole. Only in one case do I see the midsole tearing. And if you've seen in my previous boots on the Redbacks, I always mention that hydrolysis is a problem with polyurethane. And the difference between this pair of boots and this pair of boots in the construction of the outsole is that this is a welted pair of boots where they use stitching and sometimes glued with the stitching to attach this, usually to the midsole, sometimes to the sole as well, depending on the welt. And what it makes for is something that this has been used for hundreds of years. It's been used, geez, I don't even know how far back. Since, at least medieval turn shoes, as far as I know. But this pair, welted footwear, even though there's different types of welts, it's tried and true. And if you want the absolute most durable, bomb-proof pair of boots, you would probably first look at welted boots, because you can have problems where the glue breaks down for glued-on footwear, or vulcanized in some cases. And then for something like this, you do have the problem with the hydrolysis, where the polyurethane breaks down. In this case, you have polyurethane here, I believe, and then the outside uses thermoplastic polyurethane. I'm not sure how much of a difference is, but the hydrolysis specifically applies to the materials breaking down specifically without use. You'll if you find, I recently saw 2 examples of one. There was actually a Swiss, going back to this design, the Swiss changed to polyurethane boots, I think, and which is also called direct attach. They switched to it in like the 90s, and there was a pair that I saw on eBay, and the person was soling it as is broken, and the midsole here was completely deteriorating. It was splitting from the back from the material. So again, if you buy a used pair of boots that is polyurethane or direct attach, either or, they're the same thing. Well, I think direct attach also uses EVA foam, but it over time it will break down. So if you buy a 5-10 year pair, and even with EVA rubber or EVA foam, like a year, and most tennis shoes use this design, you'll find that it's splitting, that it's detaching from the boot here. There was also a situation, another example, if anyone wants to see a real case of breaking down, I saw part of the Queer Eye for the Straight Guy show, and in it there was a guy who had about 30 or 40, well, I think he had about 100 pairs of shoes. He couldn't get rid of any of them. And some of the shoes were actually breaking as well, if anybody wants to see an in-video example of that breakdown happening. So, again, even though most people are switching, or have switched in the past 20 years to this design, there are many problems to it, as I've gone over in my other videos. So, I think, and I mentioned in that video, one of the biggest problems that you might encounter is it might be not the manufacturer, it might be the distributor. I think I would blame the manufacturer more if they made like 100 models and they didn't have enough sales to get the models out to make everything they just manufactured out within a few months. And I think I'll give you, one thing they could do is have the manufacture date on the footwear itself, so that the buyer can be wise about it if they've bought a pair of footwear and it's a couple years old. Especially if they offer it on a very ludicrous or a very generous sale, and you don't realize that you bought a 5-year-old pair of boots. But what was I going to say? So I think the biggest problem might be the distributor, because you might find that the distributor has held on to a pair of footwear for years, and then they haven't sold it, and then when you buy it, again, a generous sale, and let's say, and it's already falling apart within about 2 or 3 months because the bond is broken down. Actually, I cannot show it on video. I did try it beforehand, but I do have a pair of US-made PF Flyers that I was trying out, and they actually included the manufacturing date. In this case, it's October of 2017 right there. I will try desperately again, and highly doubt that you will see anything of the kind that will give you anything but hieroglyphics, but the show must go on. And in this case, the PF Flyers were made at least a year before I received them. Now, I don't know yet if that will make a problem with in this case, that the PF Flyers are vulcanized, so it's a glued down, pressed down piece of footwear, not like this. But it could actually significantly affect the durability of those pair of shoes. I will see. And it is nice to see. And in that specific situation, I actually got those direct from PF Flyers. So it came straight from the New Balance factory that was making them, as far as I know. It's straight into my hands. And again, I received a 1-year-old pair of boots from the manufacturer, which means in a case like this, if I don't buy these from Redback and I buy them from another place in Australia, let's say, I don't know how old they are. You might receive an absolute pair of duds, and these might be them, since they're only about, like I said, 6 to 9 months old. So beware about the supplier, and in recognition of the other things I brought up in this video, the efficient one-piece design, and using studs versus using speed laces versus using eyelets. I'll have another video in which I'll show one of those dastardly like 20 eyelet pair of boots that in the future. So in conclusion, like I've mentioned before, polyurethane and molded sole footwear may not be as capable at handling rigid conditions or designs as other options such as welted footwear, such as this. Again, this is particularly when used with lacing. In this case, I mean, again, comparing it to the other Redback boots I owned, there wasn't any lacing here. It was just, in my other videos, I've said that there's, about 4 pairs of where you can tighten a pair of boots. There's the toes. There's here. So again, there'd probably be here where the ball of the foot is. There would be here where the arch is. There would be here where the instep is. And then you sort of have up here where the ankle is. Not every boot uses that unless it's a boot and not a shoe. In this pair of boots compared to the other ones I've shown, most of the tightening, again, there's none at the toe here, but most of this tightening is going to be here at the instep. So that tightness is going to be distributed across here, and then the rest is going to be up here where the ankle is. So in this case, I think you have a significant amount of tension that's here from here, which is causing that to split, and that might be a problem in polyurethane footwear, whereas it's completely fine if it's welted because this is stitched. The leather's very good in this situation, etc., etc. I'll have some other polyurethane footwear I might review in the future. Blah, blah, blah. So my recommendation of sort of Australian work boots that I've gone over in the past, or blunnies, does not currently extend to any of the company's laced footwear because of these problems I've seen. With the addition of complexity, there is more features that are fit for failure, even in a simple design like this one-piece leather upper with the accents, blah, blah. In this case, also, I have seen that more traction leads to more abrasion. Now, this isn't the other pairs of people's footwear I've looked at. Forgot to mention this. I've actually seen where they've owned it significantly less time than me, and it could just be that they're harder on their boots. I don't know. But I've seen that specifically these smaller areas have been destroyed within about a month because of that. And I'm guessing, again, because you have more grip here and you're stepping and you're sliding, you're causing way more abrasion than if you were using something that was sort of clunky. Again, like I guess maybe more like a clown shoe where your foot's sort of sliding around in it and it just sort of more easily stepping onto the ground. And hopefully that makes sense. Under ideal circumstances, using studs and this design, like with the Limer boots, has many advantages though in terms of getting a snug fit with very little stitching necessary, eliminating wear and the potential for water seepage. In my opinion, it is a more efficient design, these over the other one. And again, just to go back over this one more time, I can get so much more of a snug fit with this pair of boots than I can with these. This one, I can't even tighten them enough. And it's the same thing with Doc Martens. You have to buy a whole size below just to be able to tighten the boots enough. A lot of times with these boots, they give too much slack here, so you're literally doing a sort of a military tightness, and it's still not a tight enough fit. This boot, especially, it's sort of around here where it's just that there is no ankle support, or in this, excuse me, what is this? Ankle support in this upper region. It's just very loose, and it'll be tightened and loose there, or this part will just be significantly loose. I'm also going to have another video complaining about 6-inch boots over about a 5-inch like this. But I'll save that for a later video rather than going off on so many tangents that I have 0 viewers, and have a great day.